Chapter 22. It was slow going. Every few steps, the person in the lead had to throw out a handful of gravel, walk forward, then scoop up another handful to throw. It amazed Tessa that there was always more gravel around to throw. This seemed man-made too, or at least of human design. Nothing in nature would dump tons of gravel in a field of grass, would it? Once they got close enough to the tower to see the windows at the top, they slowed down even more, stopping every few steps to watch for movement, to listen for the first hint of any shouted commands. Gideon began walking with his hands high in the air, back in the pose of a surrendering soldier. He walked that way for so long that Tessa was certain his arms must have gone numb, but he didn't complain. While Gideon was busy, constantly surrendering, Tessa took over the job of throwing out the handfuls of gravel to test the route ahead for him. Tessa remembered the question Deck had asked her back on the plane as soon as Gideon was out of earshot. He your boyfriend? She remembered the way Gideon's mother had looked at her as Tessa had walked into Gideon's bedroom. She remembered the taunt nasty Cordina Curdle from school had flung at her back at the auditorium the day the day of the ruined award ceremony. If you and the hero are so close, why aren't you running after him? All that had made Tessa feel a bit sleazy. She had run after Gideon. She had chased after him all the way into enemy territory. In her wildest dreams, she might have hoped for a hug or a kiss from the glowing hero. She never could have imagined how intimate she could feel, not even touching him, but walking together in silence through a field of grass, throwing rocks out in front of him, trying to keep him alive. Was it because I spoke up and volunteered to risk my life too? Did that make us true partners? Something moved at the top of the tower. In a flash, Deck had her arm reared back and began throwing rocks toward the dark windows. Stop! Stop! Gideon begged. It doesn't work for me to surrender if you're launching projectiles at them. They'll retaliate. A flurry of wings flapped out the tower windows. Guys, look. Stop arguing. Stop throwing things. It's only birds, Tessa cried, pulling back on Deck's arm. Deck dropped the rest of her handful of gravel and wiped her hand across her sweaty forehead, leaving a trail of dirt. Yeah, and we wouldn't have known that if I hadn't flushed them out, she bragged. Tessa looked at Deck carefully. Deck had been the cautious one before. Why was she taking risks now? You already knew it was just birds, didn't you? Tessa asked. How were you so sure? Deck shrugged. Educated guess, she said. Look at all the bird droppings coming down from those windows. I bet they're even thicker inside. Nobody's going to be hanging out in the midst of all that. Or if they are, it's not going to be somebody who'd know or respect the rules about how to treat a surrendering enemy soldier. So I had to go on the offensive. Tessa squinted up toward the top of the tower. Now that Deck had pointed it out, Tessa noticed the streaks of white and gray and brown running down from the windows. And Tessa could see now that all the windows were broken. Only a few jagged shards of glass remained in place, throwing off reflected light from the sun. She looked at Gideon, wondering what brilliant deductions he'd figured out, staring at the tower. Still, Gideon said stubbornly. He wasn't looking at the tower. He was glaring at Deck. Still, we have to make it look like we've come in peace. But we haven't, Deck said. We can't. Not when our whole country's at war. There didn't seem to be anything to say to that. They walked on each step, tense and fearful. It was a relief finally to reach the base of the tower, out of sight of the dark windows overhead. Tessa saw that the metal door hung open, rusted half off its hinges, revealing a flight of stairs inside. So we're going to be really, really quiet climbing up there, Tessa whispered, just in case. Won't work, Gideon said, shaking his head. We don't have any weapons with us. If someone up there does. He leaned his head into the stairwell, tilted it upward, and shouted, We surrender! We surrender! The words echoed back at him. Ender, Ender, Ender. But no other voice replied. Gideon pulled his head back out into the sunlight. You two want to wait here while I go up? He asked. Yes, Tessa thought, but somehow it seemed like it would be more frightening to stand around at the bottom of the tower waiting. I'll go with you, she said. She turned toward Deck, expecting the other girl to say, Okay, let me know what you find up there. But Deck was already headed for the stairs. I'm in, she said. Why? Tessa wondered. Why isn't she letting Gideon and me take all the risk like she did before? Tessa noticed the stiff way Deck held her shoulders, the way she clenched her jaw as she walked. Oh, Tessa thought. Deck doesn't trust us. She isn't sure we'd tell her the truth about what we'd see. All three of them began climbing the stairs together. Tessa guessed that Deck wasn't worried about any landmines being left here, because she wasn't making any effort to walk behind the other two. Birds fluttered around them, darting for the open door. Oh, yeah, Tessa thought. If there were any explosives around here, the birds would have set them off already. She was proud of herself for figuring this out. She turned and looked behind her and realized that she, Deck, and Gideon were leaving footprints in the thick layer of bird droppings. And that's another reason for Deck to be convinced there's no one above us in this tower. Anyone else would have left footprints too. This helped Tessa relax a little climbing the stairs. But it still wasn't a pleasant experience. The bird droppings covered the stair railings too, so Tessa didn't want to hold on, even in spots where the concrete of the stairs had crumbled away. The farther they climbed, the darker it got, since there were no windows actually in the stairwell. 2 flights up, Gideon pulled a flashlight out of somewhere and muttered almost apologetically, "Standard military issue." That helped a little. The three of them just had to cluster together, staying near the light. Finally, panting and sweating, they reached the end of the stairs. Another door sagged from its hinges there, more rust than anything else, and Gideon shoved gingerly past it into a wide open room. "We surrender?" he said softly. But this was clearly pointless. The room held nothing but broken glass and twisted metal, and the thickest layer of bird droppings Tessa had ever seen. With a complaining cry, one last crow swooped out of the broken window. Tessa startled at the noise, then bent over, her hands on her knees, and tried to catch her breath. "What a relief," she murmured, her heart still pumping hard, but only from the exertion and the horror of the crow. "We're safe after all." Gideon didn't pause even to take a breath. He strode directly to the window, stared out at it, horror spreading across his face. "No, no, no," he screamed. He pounded his fist against the concrete wall. "There can't be this many lies."